So did everybody get the study week presentation, first of all? All right, so let's just go right to the, over and above the exam info, I've done these. I hope everybody has seen this. These are the slides, additional that I put for the exam question. So question 1 is multiple choice questions. Now that's typical what has been asked in the assignment and in previous papers. So it could cover anything, but it's not rocket science questions. It's fairly straightforward. In these questions there are, here and there are a graph which you have to interpret and give the right answer. And there are also a table that you have to interpret. So the focus areas, I wanted to get the pointer. So the focus areas for the exam questions is you must concentrate on these areas over here. So any terms and conditions in economic terms, economic systems, which we'll get to in the presentation. There will be a question on that. The flow diagrams, which is the flow between income and expenditure, which we'll get to. And then the PPC theory and curves. This could be a typical PPC curve given, and you have to interpret it in the short questions. And then the economic goods and elasticity is always important. So there will be questions about those as well. So we're going to go back to the presentation just now. All right, question 2 is true and false questions. The first question is 10 marks, as you can see. 10 marks. And then the second one is for true and false. And these you have to, that's general multiple choice. True and false is 10 marks. And the typical questions will be on supply and demand and the PPC again. The background to the supply and production and costs. Producer and consumer surplus. Minimum and maximum prices. We'll get to that in a minute. And then fixed, variable, average and marginal costs. And then a completion of a typical table. Sorry, that's on question 3. So it's fixed, marginal, average and variable costs. Has anybody looked at these calculations? We'll briefly discuss it in the presentation. You have to be able to calculate variable and average and especially marginal costs. That will always appear in exam questions. Then, so for question 1 are these focus points, question 2 are these focus points, for question 3, all right, this is typical, the completion of a table, as I said, to calculate the values. Sorry, I'll have to stand like this to see properly. Completion of a table, so you'll be given a few values, and we'll show you now how to calculate these values. And then that's for 5 marks, that we'll be doing that. And the focus point on that is the total, average, variable and marginal cost. As I say, this is very important to be able to calculate those. And it's simply a formula that you use to calculate that. And in a minute I'll just show you more or less how that is calculated. And it's practice, that's all it is. And for question 4, typical in all papers you'll get definitions. So it's knowledge and insight questions on the study units. The pages, anything between study units 4 and 11 will be applicable. And then once again, is look carefully. The reason I put that type of a question on the right column there is typical with, the areas and the sections out of the book that it comes from. So it will be elasticity and coefficients again, demand, supply and equilibrium concepts, labor concepts, consumption concepts, and income and distribution. So that question number 4 counts 18 marks. And then the next question is question 5. It will be typically on demand and supply curves, the equilibrium in the market, and the prices and the quantities, equilibrium prices and quantities. Right. On the right, I want to just elaborate a little bit on the demand and supply curves, and then this I think could be something new for students. This part over here, you'll be given, I'm going to show you an example just now of what will typically be expected of you. So I just want to elaborate a little bit on this part. I've put an extra slide in just to show you more or less how a question like this will be asked. Now this is especially on pages 80 and 81 of the textbook. Yes, 80 and 81. There's an appendix, and you must just go through that. I'm going to move down to that slide that I've added. A typical question will look like this. You'll be given you have to calculate the equilibrium quantity and the price from two equations. The first is a demand equation and a supply equation. Now, the equations, don't get scared if you see the equations. All you have to do here is you have to know, you'll ask to calculate the equilibrium quantity and price. Now, to get to that, the two equations must be equal to each other, because equilibrium is always where quantity demanded is equals to quantity supplied. So what you have to do is you have to calculate from the one equation, the various values. You just, like there's the one equation and here's the other equation. So there's equilibrium. So put the two together, and then from there, okay, this slide, I see some people are taking photos. This slide I'll forward to everybody just to work through it. So all you do is you equal the two equations, and from there you calculate algebraic with maths the value. So you'll first get the price value, and then you'll do the calculations. You'll substitute the price in the calculations to get to the quantity value. So I'm not going to go through it in detail, but that's more or less how you do it. The basic the principle to remember is to equate the two equations equal to each other, because you look at equilibrium is exactly where supply and demand is the same. Are you okay? All right, so there may be a question on this, different values. So go to page 80 and 81 of the textbook and just work through those equations, and you'll see what I mean. And then what I'll do is this specific slide I'll forward to all the students to work through properly. And in the book there are examples as well. All right, so just make sure those 2 pages, it's a new question to students. That's why it's just an insight question. So just make sure you can do that. If you're not sure what to do, you can always contact me and email me. But practice this example. Put the values together and see if you can do the calculations. It will be different values, but as long as you can do it in an exam, you'll be able to do it. All right, so that was under supply and demand. Then we're going to come to question 6. It's an overview of perfect competition. It's mostly out of chapter 10, and the focus areas, jumping. The focus areas are that given there below. It's a given graph. Concepts around normal economic profit as well as economic loss. I think in the assignment there was a question about economic loss. You had to explain what economic loss is, so it will be something similar to that. And then total economic costs is also important. So go through chapter 10, see where all of these appear, and make sure that you can address or do that part of the chapter. Then question 7 is, there's always questions on elasticity. You saw a couple in the assignment. It may not necessarily be the same. As we go through the presentation, I'm just going to focus on what I think is important for the exam and what you need to focus on. But those are the focus points once again for elasticity. So you have to discuss elasticity, and you must be able to interpret it. You must be able to do the calculations as we've seen in the assignment. In the assignment was, for instance, point elasticity. Now in the exam it could be calculate arc or midpoint elasticity. So just make sure that you can do that. We'll go through it just now. And there will be formulas that you have to write down. The drawing of the graphs, we saw that in the assignment, not necessarily the same. You may be given graphs and interpret it from there. But if you can do the assignment, if you do the assignment, you'll more or less know what it looks like and what is expected of you. And you must know the coefficients. There could be a table, as in the study guide. where you have to give the different coefficients for the different types of elasticities. So not necessarily graph. It could be a table where you have to write down the elasticity, correct elasticity. So for instance, for perfectly inelastic, just like in an assignment, maybe just the coefficients for that. Then you have to give an example. Now that comes back again to the assignment. You must be able to show in the textbook, it breaks it down, we'll come to the presentation, but you must be able to give an example of the different types of elasticity as well. Okay, so concentrate on those. Any questions? There's still a lot of time left. You can just email me and I'll address your questions. And as I said, if I think it's important, I'll put it on the whole group for everybody to see. Then question, that's for 60 marks. So you'll see that counts quite a big weight in the exam. And then question 8 is for 3 marks on production and cost, study unit 8. Mostly out of chapter 8. And the completion of a table in terms of labor as a product. So go to chapter 8 and see where that appears. So typically that will be a calculation where you are given a few values and you just use the formulas to calculate the values. It's only for 3 marks, and it's not all that difficult. So just make sure you can do that. If you look into the previous exams, there was a similar question to this. So see that you can do the previous exams, questions on this, and it will be very similar to that. And then question 9 is for 5 marks. That's on chapters 10. Those are more or less the pages. Market structure, overview and perfect competition. And that will be an illustration with a graph. Okay, as we go through the presentation, I'll highlight what it's all about. Okay. Then question 10. Okay, so just to go back to question 9. Illustration with a graph in those chapters, so see what's more or less applicable in that study unit. And question 10, it will be explanations of various structures in the labor market. Chapter 11 and 12, illustrating and understanding of the various market structures and concepts in the labor market. So it's not a long chapter, and as we go through the presentation, the slides are also not so many, so I'm going to focus on the slides that we've put in there. The definitions and the descriptions of economic terms, I think you all know what's expected of you. There were some in the assignment and in previous papers. Go through them. Make sure you can do it. So I'm not going to address them in detail. I'll just run through it basically. But it could be any question, but it's not all that difficult. So economics, you must all know what that is. That's the basic definition that you need to address. If you ask, what is the definition of economics? This is on slide 4. Macro versus microeconomics. That's what you need to know about microeconomics and macroeconomics and what the difference is between the two. The economic problem consists of the 3 parts. You need to know what are the 3 parts of the economic problem. What formulates the economic problem? So you need to know unlimited needs, limited means, and optimal allocation of choices. So that's on slide number 6. So just go, make sure that you understand that. If you're not sure, go back to the textbook or the study guide, and if not sure, come back to me and I'll explain that to you. We don't have enough time to go through everything in very detail. There's the economic problem continue. So it's just the needs in the economy and personal needs, and it all boils back to consumers and suppliers. So just see that you understand that. You must know what the production factors are, typically. It's natural resources, capital, interest, labor, wages, and entrepreneurship and profit. And the products are the goods and services. And then you need to know the difference between the various goods and services. And there are a couple of slides about this, but I'm not, as I say, I'm not going to go through it in detail. You'll see a whole lot of definitions on economic goods, free goods, and all that. Just make sure that you can address that in a paper. It could be a short, mostly a short question or a multiple choice question. Then economic problem continues, PPC curve. Okay, for the PPC curve, as I said earlier on, there could be PPC questions in the true and false question or in the multiple choice. So it's always important to know the definition and how you calculate opportunity cost. A graphic illustration, for instance, in the assignment, so everybody, you must just stop me if I go too fast or ask questions. In the assignment, there was a graphic illustration of the PPC that you had to draw the attainable and efficient and curve points and so on. So it could be something like that again. So you need to understand a graphic illustration. You may be given a graph, like I said, and then interpret it from there. It will not be the same as in the assignment, just in a different format, but it will address the same information. And then the data we obtain from the PPC curves, that's on the next slide you'll see. So that's just how you draw up a PPC curve. Now in the exam, I'm not going to give you values that you must draw up a PPC curve. It's going to be more in general. But you need to understand how a PPC curve is drawn up between various products. And this table will explain to you nicely what it is. It's normally two commodities, pillows and blankets, and then the opportunity cost. As you vary your budget between buying more of the one and selling more of the other, until you get to your optimum choice. Okay, there's typical PPC curve. This specific question was in the assignment. You need to know where are all the efficient, what I've seen in the assignment, people, they put K, for instance, but they don't explain what it is. So they just put a K there, and they put an L there, and then, you know, they don't explain themselves. You don't know if they understand it. So if you get a question like this, please just explain the point. And you must say that all the efficient points is totally on the curve from A to F. And you'll get marks for the labeling of the graph. And then it's always correct also to, if you get a curve like this, to name the PPC and put a point towards the curve so that the examiner can see that you know what is the PPC curve. You may know or think you know, but it's better to illustrate it. So it's just easier for the markers, and you'll earn marks if you do that. And it won't take a lot of time. So. Then the PPC data, as we said, it illustrates the combinations of two products to be produced with fixed inputs. That's the theory behind it, and always important as well. I'm just going to go back to the next previous slide. Some students drew the PPC curve as a straight line. It's incorrect. It's got to be concave. So it's got to bulge away from the origin. So it's got to have that round shape. Otherwise, it doesn't explain it properly or illustrate it properly. So that's the correct shape. It has to be, some students drew a straight line, and that is actually not correct. We didn't penalize them, but it's not correct. A to F illustrates, as I say, the most efficient points. The productive allocation of resources, that's part of the theory between the various inputs. And the maximum combination of products which can be produced with available labor and machines, there was a you had to do a definition on the PPC, and just make sure that you address the PPC definition correctly. And then the most efficient points on the curves we did talk about. Point K, as I say, point L, explain what it is in your answer in the exam. This was also a question in the assignment, not this one, but if the one consumer goods, for instance, is kept constant, and the capital goods, the technology for capital goods is improved, then your curve swivel from the one point, fix at the one point towards the bottom axis. I think the next one was in the exam. This one was in the exam. So it's an improved technique for producing consumer goods, where capital goods, in the assignment. Capital goods was kept constant, and you have to read the question, what is asked. Some students drew this one, because I didn't read the question properly. Just make sure you read your questions properly always. So you need to know the swivel of the curve, and then I think this one was also in the assignment. That's when both are increased, the techniques, then it's parallel movement. What I've seen in the assignments, what we've marked, students didn't do too bad overall. So we're quite impressed with the average mark, more or less. You'll see the results soon, but I don't know how you people did. Were you happy with your marks, everybody? Just okay. So the next question of the economic problem is what should be produced? Now this is actually common sense. These are the goods that that need to be produced. So it's tangible objects, services are intangible things, and it's to satisfy human needs. And then the classification of goods, as I said, I'm not going to go through this in detail. You have to just work through this yourself. And just make sure that you understand the various goods. So you get consumer goods versus capital goods. You need to know the difference. And there are the differences. You need to know non-durable, semi-durable, and durable goods. The difference between those, it could be a question in the shorter questions or the multiple choice or whatever, true and false. Final goods versus intermediary goods. The best way to do this is to maybe draw up a table for yourself, write down final good, and then see if you can write down the definition next to it. And just study it. And then when it gets to the exam, you'll know exactly what to say and what to write down for that. Final goods and intermediary goods, the explanations are there. Public goods versus private goods. Public goods for the community, private goods is for the consumer or the household to use. Economic goods and free goods. Like I say, just go make a table for yourself and see if you can write down the definition and that you can understand it. And homogeneous versus heterogeneous goods. Homogeneous goods are exactly alike. Heterogeneous, they are different. Different varieties. So that's what that means. Normal goods versus inferior goods. Normal goods are goods with a positive income elasticity. I think there was a question in the assignment, or was it in the ECO10A, 20, I'm not sure, but inferior goods is normally a good that has a negative income elasticity. The reason is if your income rises, you're going to spend less on the inferior good. The demand's going to come down because you're going to, like between a hamburger and a steak. If your income rises, you're going to rather have steak and less hamburgers. So the inferior good has a negative income elasticity. So as your income rises, the demand for inferior goods will come down. Then normative statements, okay, this is just common sense. That's normative. And positive statements is more concrete. Global warming is taking place. The growth rate was so and so in a country. The Shuttleworth was, for instance, the first South African in space. So positive statements is true statements. Normative statements are people's opinions, whatever you think of it. Okay. Then economic systems, like we say, that it's important to differentiate between the various economic systems. Central economic questions come into play. What, how, and for whom goods must be produced. Traditional system is like in KwaZulu-Natal, where everybody just produces for themselves. The son takes over from the father, he grows his own products. So it's a typical traditional system. The problem is there's stagnation. You must just know what the negative is from a traditional system. Nothing changes, they don't improve and so on. So that is the negative thing of the traditional system. The command system is a centrally planned system. Like South Africa is a mix between the two, but that's typically where the government, like ESCOM or Transnet and so on, that's a command system. Centrally planned, and the negative part is that the public ownership of the factors of production is not in the hands of the entrepreneur or the consumer, it's in the hand of the government. The market system is the one where pricing determines the quantity supplied and demanded. So it's a typical market or price system. And the larger the number of buyers, or there's a large number of buyers and sellers, interaction between demand and supply determines the prices and the private ownership of factors of production. And in the mixed economy, I think there was a question like that in the assignment. That's typically where you get the market system and the central government role to play, which is in South Africa the case. So you may be given a table and say summarize the different systems and the negative aspects of the systems. That's why I highlighted the negative and also the advantages of the systems. So just look at the disadvantages and advantages of all the systems. Then we come to the flow diagrams. Now there are a whole lot of flow diagrams, but it all boils down to this. It's the production, spending and income. You just add various sectors into that flow. So that is the basic flow. So you have to read carefully what is asked. If you're asked to show a flow diagram that shows the production, income and spending, if you just ask that, then all you have to do is this diagram. So the three major flows. So if you ask production, income and spending, you draw this diagram. Now under that, you'll get the stock variables and the flow variables. That's more to do in macroeconomics, so we're not going to concentrate on that all that much, but and there you get, it's basically the same. There's a simple circular diagram. This slide is quite important for the exam. You may be given this slide in a slightly different format, and you need to know how the flows from the household to the market, and from the market for goods and services to the producers and back. Just get the blue flows of the flow of money is the flow of money. The black flows is the flow of goods. So just make sure that this diagram is quite important out of this section of the work. For this, is it okay? For this exam, obviously this boils down to the first diagram. Now, this is a circular flow of income and spending. It's basically the same, but highlighted a bit with the firms and the households and how the flows are between those. So it's important from the firm spending to the factor market, from the factor market to the households. The households spend in the goods market, they purchase stuff, and from the goods market goes back, the income goes back to the firms. So that's a diagram. The good news is that in the exam we didn't ask a very complicated flow diagram. I think rather concentrate on that diagram, slightly in a different format. So it also doesn't count so many marks, but make sure that this is on slide 35 that you can understand that. And then the characteristics of households and firms. In the flow diagram we were talking about the firms and the households. These are just the definitions of the households and of the firms. So the households represent the demand represent demand, and the firms represent supply in the economy. Now the reason why we want you to understand this is basics. This is very basics of microeconomics. To see the demand and the supply side, what it's made up of, how the flows are between the various entities. And then the interaction between the households and the firms, you'll get to supply and demand. Now that there's the supply and demand, typical goods market supply and demand curve. So from the firms, they're on the supply side, supply of goods and services, and the household is the demand for goods and services. And the interaction between those two is always there. So this is just something to understand to get later to the supply and demand side and the analysis. I said earlier that slide is very important. Now I'm going to jump to that slide. It's on slide 35. You must combine with that slide on 39. See, it's very much the same. It's just a little bit altered. So make sure that you can do those and that you know. Say for instance, you may be asked that arrow on the outside. say for instance, this arrow will be given A, and then you're going to be given the diagram, and you're going to ask, what does A stand for? And then you'll say that it's the flow from the market for goods and services to the household. Okay, so it could be any of those. So see how the flows work. From government flows to the market factors for production factors and for the market for goods and services. But concentrate on the outside flows. That's why I highlighted the earlier slide. The outside flows, just please make sure that you understand that. And then this is just a more complicated, this has been asked in exams before, but this exam, we're not going to ask it like this, but it's important, just work through that, and then you'll see the logic behind it. This is just where the government is brought into play. So it's the government included in the circular flow of production and income and spending. So what the role of the government is, how it interacts with the firms and with the households, into the goods market and into the factor market. Then this one is just the foreign sector into the circular flow of production, income and spending. So the trick is in the flow chart is to read the question, see what's included and what not. So this was also a question in the exam before. Include the foreign sector and then show the flow diagram, how it looks, and that is typically it. But concentrate more on the previous slides. And then this is the one flow where the financial institutions is included in the circular flow. So you must show the financial sector up to the firms, savings go to the financial sector, and then from the household is the spending and income to the firms spend back to the household. So it's just the financial institutions included. It's important, this slide here is also important, slide 43. You need to form, or you need to recognize the formula that's made up from this. It's on the next slide. But you need to know what spending by household is, and services. That's normally depicted by, or defined by C, the symbol C. Spending by the firms on capital goods is investment, so it's I. Spending by government is normally government spending. And export is normally X, and imports is Z. So just this slide, make sure that you just know what the symbols are for the various things, because on the next slide, you may be given a formula like this, and then you must recognize that that is government spending. That's exports minus imports. That's consumption, that's investment. So just make sure you understand the definitions of that expenditure curve. You may also be asked in the exam maybe to write down the formula for total expenditure in the economy. And then you have to write down that formula. Now, there are leakages and withdrawals out of the system. This is more just for information's sake. Taxation is a withdrawal. Savings is also from the system into an account or into an investment project. Or so, and then imports is a flow back into the economy. So money out and goods into the economy. But more important is understand that total expenditure formula, and on the previous slide what all the symbols stand for. Then, all right, this is basically the next couple of slides is just a summary of all of these put together. Major elements. The major elements of the circular flow of income and spending obviously will be the financial sector, the foreign sector, and the government. It's all included into one, and how they interact with each other. So for your own purposes, it's just good that you just understand how this is all put together. So this is a summary of the previous slide, and I think the next one as well. This is a final summary of the slides. There's the financial institutions, the government, and the rest of the world, the firms and the households, how they interact with each other. But as I said, we're not going to ask all such complicated flow diagrams. Concentrate on those that I indicated to you. All right, now, in any economic paper, you'll always find questions on supply and demand. That's the basis of economics. PPC curve, supply and demand, elasticity, indifference curves, and so on. And then the various economic systems. Then you'll get to other important aspects. But let's stick to this a little bit. So you have to know the definition of demand. Now there was a question like this. Some people wrote one sentence and they won't get the marks. You have to define it properly. You have to say, refers to the quantities of a good and service that prospective buyers are willing and able to purchase during a certain period. To complete that, you'll get marks if you do that, but to complete it, you must also say add various prices. So it's a whole package. So you can't just write, it refers to the quantities of a good and service that buyers want to buy. That's not the definition. Just make sure that you understand those definitions. Could be in the exam again. So, and here's the other important aspects of demand. Demand is linked to consumers. You may be asked, if you look at the definition of demand, what are the important parts in that form, that definition? So then you say demand is a link to consumers. It's a flow concept. It's not one's needs or requests. It's what the people are actually buying. So just have a look at the important aspects of the definition. In the law of demand, you must know this by now, price up, quantity down, and vice versa. If you ask a question, a basic question about demand, you can say price up, quantity down, or vice versa. It means price down and quantity up. So vice versa is always important if the question is asked like that, to cover both aspects of that. It could count a mark. Okay, so we've covered that. We'll come to supply just now. Let's just stick a little bit to demand. This is just various consumers and what they would like to buy per week. So this is how demand curve is typically drawn up. Now for the exam, we're not going to give you values or a table and you must draw up a demand curve. We want to test your insight knowledge. So we don't expect you to draw the demand curve from values. It's going to be more questions similar to the assignment and to previous papers. So concentrate on that. So this is just as an illustration how demand curve is derived. Now if you go back to that table, you'll see there are all the different points on the demand curve for each of the consumers. So a typical demand curve is that I can't believe in the assignment that people put a supply curve like that and a demand curve like that. So just make sure you know what direction the demand curve is and what it is made up of. This is actually the various consumers that we had in the table. So there's all the different demands, and the market demand curve is then just a combination of all the consumers together. So just as it doesn't have to be only 3, it could be 100, making up the market demand curve. So if you ask, how's the market demand curve derived? You say it's the demand from all the different consumers, or a combination of consumers put together in a combined curve. Everybody okay with that? Ask if there are questions. Everybody okay? Yeah. Okay, so this is slide number 52. Now, I suggest you study this slide in detail. It gives you the determinant, the price of the good, and what it will cause on the demand curve. It could be a practical question maybe on this. Look in your previous papers how it's asked. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. But I can say there is a question like that in the paper. Practical question, where if the price falls, how the consumers are going to react, what's going to happen to quantity and the equilibrium price, and so on. It won't be necessary to give values, but you must know the concept of what will happen. So you always asked a movement along the curve. I think we've seen it in the assignment as well. Now, a movement along the curve. I just want to see if it's shown on the next slide, is a movement on the demand curve. Now, in a paper it was asked, there were some questions on supply and then some on demand. And people took supply right through the question. Always read what is asked between supply and demand. So if you ask a movement on the demand curve, now that's a typical movement on the demand curve. You must always label your graphs, price and quantity. You'll get marks if you just do that. And then the demand curve, as I said, that is a typical format of the demand curve. From the bottom right up to the top left is the demand curve. And a movement on the curve, it could be between any points, but take, as an illustration, take 2 points, A and B, and show it with the arrow, because you get marks for that. Because if you just draw the demand curve with the 2 points, the examiner is going to say, but what are you showing? You know, so show it with the arrow. And we're going to get to a shift of the demand. You must know the difference between a movement on the demand curve, which is that A, and a shift of the demand curve, which is graph B. So a shift is always where you get the two demand curves, and a shift either up or down. You can show it anyway. But you must know the difference between a movement along the curve and a shift of the curve. If we go back to the previous table, the only thing that causes a movement along the curve is a change in the price of a good. So the correct description is a fall or increase in the quantity demanded, and it's an upward or downward movement of the demand curve, depending if the price rises or falls. So see this, understand this table, and you'll be okay. And then for so just to sum it up, this is for a movement along the demand curve. Now all the rest here is for a shift. So any of those can cause a shift. I think in the assignment you were asked to give 4 reasons for the shift. Now these are the prices of the related goods, substitutes and complements, increase or decrease. It's an upward or downward shift. So all of these causes the shifts. Income of a normal good, so income of the consumer, the population, if it increases or decreases, is obviously there's going to be more demand or less demand, and then the expected future price of the good. So study this table. You may be given a table like this. You never know in the exam. And then you have to show that. So take notice of this table. Are you all right? Okay. So the reason why I'm concentrating on this is there are always questions about the movement along a curve and the shift of the curve. Now it's important to firstly know what you're working with, the supply or demand. Now, in this case it's demand. Read the question. If it's demand, that is the shape of the curve. If it's supply, obviously it will be the other shape, from bottom left to top right. And then you must know the factors that causes that. Okay, so I think that's sorted out. Then you can show, if you're asked to show the difference, you can show it on one graph. There's the movement along the demand curve, those arrows there, and then the shift obviously is either up or down. So you may be asked to illustrate it, just like in the assignment. Or you may be given a value where, say for instance, the quantity has increased. What's going to happen to or what the price increases, what's going to happen to the quantity? And then you're going to have to say what's going to happen. If it's going to be a movement along, remember the price is the only factor that causes a movement along. And the price of related goods causes a shift. So that previous table is quite important to study and to understand. Then definition of supply, you need to know what this is. Once again, give the full definition. So in the assignment, there was a definition on demand. In the exam, it could be a question on both, between both. So just make sure that you cover all those aspects. It refers to the quantities and of a good or a service that the plan and are able to sell at each possible price during a certain period. So that's the full definition. So if the definition is only 1 mark, you can you can shorten it down. But if it's 2 or 3 marks, obviously put a bit more detail in. And the important aspects of supply is linked to producers, and supply is a flow concept. So just like demand, there are important aspects of demand also for supply. It's important to know this, especially for the multiple choice of the true and false questions. Law of supply is just the opposite to the law of demand. Price up and quantity goes up as well, because it goes up. Obviously the businesses make more money as producers, and they will produce more and sell more. So that's why that happens. And also vice versa. If the price down, they'll produce more. So in a typical practical question, if the price comes down, I think there was one in the assignment, where the price came down for the beer, remember, I think it was beer, from 220 to 180. So then the quantity supplied also came down. That's why the supply curve moved down. The demand curve stayed the same, and there was a movement along the demand curve. So if you can remember correctly, I think most people got that more or less right. And once again, the supply curve is made up from various suppliers of tomatoes. There's a possibility that you can supply. And then the shape of the, as we said, the supply curve is from bottom left to top right. And that's typical just because of price and quantity. So if the price rises from 2, then the quantity will rise from 5,000 to 500 to 1,000, and so on. That's why it's got that shape. So if the price goes up, the quantity goes up, and that's why you typically get that shape. And that's why the demand curve is typically the opposite shape. Because if the price rises, the quantity comes down. So that's why the shape is the other way. If the price goes up, quantity down, and if the price comes down, we'll want to buy more, purchase more, consume more. Once again, table for supply. So in the exam, read what's asked. If it's about demand or if it's about supply. It could be about both, but this is the table for supply. Now you'll see the difference. If you produce goods, if you study this table, you'll see the difference. The one is in terms of what you produce, and the other one is what you're going to go and buy at the shop. So see it in practical terms. Are you ladies okay? All right. The same as with the demand, a movement along the supply curve is shown with the arrow there. You just draw one supply curve with an arrow between 2 points. Now it's important to show the arrow because you get marks for that. You get marks for the labels. And then the shift of the curve is if you have your original supply curve, and then that's a fall in supply to the left and an increase in supply to the right. So that's a typical shift of the supply curve. Now if you go back to the previous table, once again, over here, same as with the demand curve, the only thing that causes a movement along the demand curve is the price. And the rest, what causes a shift in the demand, in the supply curve. So it's very much the same as demand. Just don't get confused between the two. Because I've seen in the science people do get confused. That's why I'm just saying, read it properly. And if you have problems, you can always email, and I'll try and assist you with that. Does everybody get the emails that's been sent out? Is it? Okay. All right. Same. You can show that those effects on one curve. There's a movement along. It's that arrow in the middle there on the original supply curve, and that's the shift in the curve. You can show it on one diagram or two, preferably two, because it's easier for yourself to draw it and see. And then market equilibrium. That's important. That's why in that slide I showed after the exam information, I said the equations comes back to equilibrium. That's why you have to understand equilibrium, because then if you get those two equations, then you must put them together. So supply and demand in equilibrium is always equal to each other. Okay, so the definition of equilibrium, it's the condition in the market system when the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. So if you get the equation and it talks about equilibrium, then you equal those two and then you just work out the math around it. It's not difficult. Work through that. Work through that last page. See that you can do that. If you can't do that, come back to me and I'll help you a bit more. And then important aspects of equilibrium. So is everybody okay with that? The definition of equilibrium. That may be a question. It wasn't asked in the assignment. It could be in the exam. It's a condition in the market system when the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. And the important aspect is the market equilibrium is at a particular price, and the price is called the equilibrium price. Now that last question, that question I treated in the beginning, I'll ask you to work out the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So equilibrium is quite important. I think the next slide is, it doesn't, okay, this is only the price still. So you get the quantity as well. So equilibrium is between the price and the quantity. So this is only the price side. The quantity, sorry, the quantity. Sorry, the price side, that's right. So that's the equilibrium price. And then, once again, if you're given the values like this, but this is just to show you how equilibrium is calculated. There's the quantity of tomatoes demanded, quantity of tomatoes supplied, and there's equilibrium in the middle where they're the same. That's equilibrium. Now anything will be an excess demand or an excess supply at the bottom there. So if the quantity demanded is 240 and the quantity supplied is only 150, then there will be a shortage in the market. People will demand more than what they can supply. So there will be a shortage of tomatoes in the market. So that's all this table shows you. There will be a surplus of tomatoes. Of course, the amount that's demanded of tomatoes is less than the demand that is supplied. So anything away from equilibrium is a distortion in the market. Now the market has a tendency to move back to equilibrium, always, over a period of time. It could take various times. But if something is if you demand more than what can be supplied, the market mechanism brings it back together to get to an equilibrium price, to get the market into equilibrium. It's just a natural tendency of the market. So if you ask what, in practical terms, what is equilibrium, then that is what you say. It's the tendency of the market to bring quantity supplied and quantity demanded equal to each other. And then you get a equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. All right, this curve, I think, copied and pasted this in the assignment. Okay, but this is a typical demand and supply market and equilibrium. There's a supply curve, there's a demand curve, and there's equilibrium. So go back to that table. If you get an excess supply, the market will have a tendency, that's why those arrows are there, to go back to equilibrium. And if the market, if there's the quantity demanded is bigger than the quantity supplied, you get an excess demand and it tends to go back to equilibrium. So if you work through the table in this slide, then you'll understand why that is happening. So just to summarize, equilibrium is where quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. And you get an equilibrium price, which is on that side there. There's equilibrium price, and there's your equilibrium quantity. Now you may be given a graph like this one, and you're going to have to say what is the equilibrium price, what is the equilibrium quantity on that graph. So if you get this graph, you'll get there's the equilibrium price is 5, and the equilibrium quantity is 200. You must be able to identify those values. Then study unit 5 is demand and supply in action. You should be able to graphically illustrate how the two work together. Now the next couple of slides are all about that. So what is important, if you get a question, a practical question, is to go back to those tables that I said, the demand table and the supply table, and go and practically work out for yourself. If there's going to be, say for instance, there's with mussels in Cape Town, something, there's a warning that they're contaminated or something. What's going to happen? People are going to demand less of that. And obviously your supply will also come down because people will demand less. The price is going to come down. So in practical terms, go back to those tables and see if there's a decrease in the price, what the effect will be on the demand side, and if there's a increase in the price, what will be the effect. And also on the supply. Remember, we said if the price goes up, the suppliers are going to supply more. But if the mussels are contaminated, the price will come down and the price will produce less. And there will also be less demand. So you must see the two in correlation to each other. If you look in your assignments, that question about the beer, that's a typical question that may be asked where the two work together. Now we'll get to just something else now. You see, that's exactly what I said now. Determine whether the demand or supply curve will shift or if there will be a movement along the curve. So you must go to the table and go and look what will shift the curve. Those are those couple of values on the right-hand side that I said will shift the curve. And whether there's a movement along the curve. It's only price that's going to cause the movement along the curve. Step 2, determine in which direction the curve will shift. And step 3 is show the change in the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity as per the shift or the movement that you anticipate. So you're going to have to put that into relation to each other. Now, I'm not going to go too much on about this, but normal goods, demand increases and demand curve move upwards. Inferior goods is the demand decreases and the demand curve moves downwards. If there's an increase in income, remember I said no steak and hamburgers, so that's typically the effect of an inferior good. A normal good is if your income rises, you're going to buy more of everything. So, and a decrease in income will just have the opposite effect. Now these next couple of slides, you just have to work through that yourself. Now the best way to do this is to go and draw the framework for a supply and demand curve and then go and see what's going to happen on the curves. If the demand curve is going to move to the right, that's a shift of the demand curve from D to D1. And you show it with an arrow normally. And if only the demand side is going to move, there's going to be a shift along the supply curve. Now there are practical examples in the book that you can just follow. There was one in the assignment, I think it was where the supply curve, you'll come to that slide now, where the supply curve actually moved down and the demand curve stayed the same. So there was a movement on the demand curve and supply curve, this is just the opposite graph, where the demand curve has shifted to the right or upwards to D1, from D to D1, and the supply curve stayed the same and moved from equilibrium to equilibrium 1, and there was a movement on the supply curve. There was a question like this in the assignment, just the other way around. So that's just a move upwards. So if the price goes up, that's why the demand curve will, remember the price on the supply side will cause a movement along the curve and there will be more demanded. So that's why the demand curve moves right to the right. And so this is just for a downwards movement. If the price comes down, the demand curve will come parallel down and there will be a shift on the supply curve. Okay, this is a discussion of the graph on the previous slide if you're not sure. So go and work through that, those graphs and look at the discussion. So it's always important to determine, if you're given a practical question, if there will be an increase in supply or a decrease in supply, and what will happen on the curves. Now, there it tells you what will happen, but go to those tables and just make sure what will happen if price comes, when it goes up or down, or price of substitute goods, or the income rises. So if this is just example. So if there's an increase in the price of the production factor, then the supply curve decreases and shift upwards. So we just go back to the, no, that's the demand. Okay. So decrease in the price of a production factor, the supply curve increases, shift downwards. The increase in productivity, the supply curve increases or shift downwards, or decreasing productivity, just the opposite. Now, what is said there is also in that table I said to you is important. So you can practice it. Go and draw the graphs and draw yourself demand and supply curves. See what will happen. With pricing, it's always important to relate it back to price and quantity and equilibrium. Will there be a new equilibrium? Will there be a new equilibrium price or a new equilibrium quantity? So is you right? Yeah, so you must determine if the demand curve is going to shift from D to D2, or if there's just going to be a movement on the demand curve and the supply curve is going to shift. It's just a matter of practicing it and drawing the diagrams for yourself. Once you draw the diagrams, it'll make sense to you and you'll understand it better. That's typical what you must do. There it says, the first graph there is the increase in price of the factors of production. Now, in the factors of production, it's got to do with the supply side, not the demand side. That's why the supply curve will move from S to S1 with that arrow. So the supply curve will move. The demand curve will stay the same. So what's going to happen here is you're going to get S and then a new supply curve with the arrow showing it. Now, in fact, there's going to be a movement on the demand curve from that equilibrium point to equilibrium 2. So that's the concept that you must basically understand with all these graphs. And that's because of increase in the price of the factor of production. See what is asked. You may be asked in the exam, what will the effect be if there's an increase? What will the effect be on market equilibrium if there's an increase in the price of factors of production? Then that is the typical graph that you're going to illustrate it with. Saying the decrease in the factors of production will just be the opposite way. And then next graph is, so for instance, what will happen to in the market for demand and supply if there's a decrease in productivity. Now the demand side won't be influenced because productivity is more about the supply side. That's why only the supply curve will change. The demand curve will stay the same. And that's just the opposite. If there's that's a decrease in productivity and an increase in productivity. So just work through those slides in your own time. And this is just a summary. This relates back to the previous slides. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but try and make out for yourself if there's a change in demand or a change in supply. Remember, I said earlier that mussels, it's going to be contaminated. The supply will come down. Suppliers will supply less because people are going to demand less. So this is what can happen on the curve, on the curves for supply and demand. So this slide here just relates back to the previous graphs that we've seen there. Practice a few. If you're not sure, send me what you don't understand, or send me a graph, how you see it, and I'll tell you quickly if you're on the right track. It's always better to communicate about it. Okay, there's simultaneous increase in demand and supply. That's where both the curves are affected. So you can just have a look what the effect will be there. Yeah. So that's typical. If mussels are going to be contaminated, there will be a shift in both of the curves. So the demand curve will come down and your supply curve. All right, we're going to get to government intervention. You just need to know how to show on a graph what the effect will be if the government introduces maximum prices, or minimum prices, or subsidies, or taxes. Now this you can go through. I don't think I've got one here. There's a maximum price. Now a maximum price is where the government don't want the price to rise too high. So they introduce, there's a maximum price. because they don't want it to rise too far from a certain point. Now there's the market equilibrium as it is before they introduce that price. Now what's going to happen is, if they introduce that price, obviously the equilibrium is going to come down, because the market will bring it down, because the government will support that price. They'll buy all the stock, for instance, to keep it at the maximum. It's actually a distortion in the market. So the result will be, if they introduce a maximum price, and this is important to know, is that there'll be excess demand. So it's Q1 to Q2. There's your excess demand there. So on a graph format, this will basically just be how you will illustrate the maximum price introduced by the government. You may be asked what it means, so just read that part over there. So maximum price, minimum price is just the opposite. They're going to introduce a minimum, so they want the price to be higher than the market price. So they'll set a minimum price and there will be a surplus in the market. And then obviously just discuss around that graph. Important to remember, a maximum price is, like the previous slide, will be below the equilibrium price. They don't want the price to rise too far. And a minimum price is they want the price higher. So they'll set it above the equilibrium price. And then the other market will rectify itself to get to equilibrium. Okay, subsidies, taxes, quotas, and import tariffs. It is important, so you can do just a self-studying. As far as I can remember, I didn't include much of this in the paper. So concentrate on minimum and maximum prices more. But it's important for yourself to, it's not subsidy, sorry, taxes, quotas, and import tariffs. See what effect it will have on the market, on the supply and the demand side of the market. And what will happen to prices? All right, now this is a study unit. Everybody get uptight if they see elasticity. It's not difficult. And there will always be questions about it. And mostly in the exams, it carries the biggest weight, because there are a reason in further economics that you have to understand the concepts. So elasticity, just think of as the name says, think of a rubber band. If it can stretch or if it can't stretch far. So we'll get to that as we go through that. So firstly, you need to define elasticity. I think there was a question like this. Could be an exam or describe elasticity or define it, whatever you call it for yourself. And then you must discuss price elasticity of demand. You must indicate the relationship between elasticity and total revenue. I'll get to that, and discuss factors that may influence price elasticity of demand. Now, if we go a bit further, it's going to take all of these separately. So that's the definition. That's the full definition that you need to give. I saw in the paper people didn't. That means all else being equal. So that term you have to include, or say if nothing else changes. That's exactly what it means. So you can either say that, or if everything else stays constant. So in that definition, if you get the definition of elasticity. So elasticity, important to know, elasticity of demand. Remember, you get elasticity of income, and you get other types of elasticity which we'll get to, but elasticity of demand is that the percentage change in the quantity demanded if the price changes. Now, if you think in terms of the band that I said, so if it's elastic, then if the price changes, the demand is going to change a lot. But if it's inelastic and the price changes, it won't change so much. You got that? So if it's elastic, if the price changes from 5 Rand to 10 Rand, and the consumption was maybe 20 Rand in the beginning, it's going to jump to 50. You know, if it's elastic, if the price changes, you can have a bigger movement in the quantity demanded, or smaller if the price goes up or down. But it's going to be a big movement. But we'll get to those. I think those graphs were in the assignment. So just remember to put the whole definition and the formula to calculate elasticity of demand is, as you've seen in the assignment, it's a percentage change in the quantity of demand over percentage change in the price of the product. There's the formula of it. You'll see you can also, and you'll be given marks. If you write this shorter, it could be the percentage in the quantity over the percentage in the price times the price over the quantity. But for your own sake, I think rather remember that formula there, because then you can put the values physically in there and go and do the calculations. So here's a numerical example. I think this graph is given in the assignment. Maybe given another graph with other values, or you may be asked to draw a graph with different values to explain it. So just make sure you understand the concept. So there's price and quantity again, and then a movement from price of 12 to a price of 8. Obviously, if the price comes down, the quantity is going to rise. So in the next couple of slides, so if this movement is from 12 to 8 is the 4, so it's okay, we'll get to the different types of elasticity now, but what will happen is the quantity will rise. So if you are given values, you just substitute it and work out, according to the previous formula, what it's going to be. So the difference, the price declines. So that's why it declines from 12 to 8. The difference is going to be 4, but the quantity is going to change. You're going to deduct in a 6. So that's a 6 over the 4, and that gives you the 0.33, and that gives you the elasticity of 1. I think that was in the assignment. Most people got that right that I saw. Then it's always important to distinguish between normal point elasticity or elasticity of demand and arc or midpoint elasticity of demand. Now, midpoint elasticity of demand was a question. It's price elasticity of demand. It's important. Some people said price elasticity in a price range, but it's got to be of demand or on a demand curve. If there are more than one big price fluctuations, people know arc elasticity to calculate elasticity. So then take a couple of prices and you get the average of those prices and the quantities to calculate almost the same formula, but you just add all the prices up and get the average between them. And that's the basis of arc elasticity. So the formula is staying as the percentage change in quantity, and there are and you add all the values up instead of just using the Q value. So you get an average of all the Q values. So that's the difference. So for point elasticity, you only take one point, but for arc elasticity, you take various points and you get the average of those points on quantity and for price. So it's the same formula. It's just there's the average of all of those eventually built into the formula. So that same formula will then read like that, and you'll get a different value. So it's important to understand that. So it's the 24 and the 18. 6 and 42, and then it's 0.4 over 0.2, and that's 0.7. So go and do this calculation for yourself. And it's this one specifically, and see that you can get to it. And then if you can't, ask me for assistance there. So the basic difference is it's a couple of values, and you get the average of the values. That's a basic difference for price and for quantity. But you work with demand. If we go back to the formula, so use the average of 2 points as doesn't only have to be 2 points. It could be a couple of points. But normally the illustration is just with 2 different points. then this is important. You could be given a table to illustrate the coefficients of different types of elasticity of demand. So what I said earlier, I'm going to start with elastic, because that's the band. And your elasticity value is always bigger than 1 for elastic. Now, I'm going to go down to the next slide. There's elastic. That's the depiction of elastic. So what's going to happen is, if you think of the band, if the product is elastic, you get a small change in the price. There's your price, and a small change in the price. I think that you can put percentages in there. It's better to say 5% change in the price will cause a 15% change in quantity. So if it's elastic, a small change in the price will cause a bigger change in the quantity. So that's the concept that you must understand. Then to go back to the previous slide, I'm going to stick to elasticity first. Perfectly elastic is where elastic changes into infinity. So it stretches all the way. So a price change can, if a product is perfectly elastic, can stretch much. A 5% change in the price can cause a 100% change in, or to infinity. Some products are like that. And the reason for that is it's products that you need, that you have to buy. Fuel keeps on going up. Everybody still buys it. So the consumption of fuel is infinity. So if it goes up by 50 cents, people are still going to buy. Or if it comes down, people are going to buy much more. You know. So if you can get it at the price now, you'll buy it to pot it up for future price rises. So perfectly elastic is where the change in quantity is large when the price changes in a smaller effect. Then, okay, that's elastic and perfect elastic. Then I'm going to just concentrate on unit elastic. So unit elastic has got a coefficient value of 1. So as I said, just make sure that you know these coefficient values, because it will always be asked. So unit elastic is equal to 1. Elastic is, elasticity is larger than 1, and the perfect is obviously to infinity. People don't know what that sign is. That's a sign for infinity, unending. Unit elastic is where if you increase the price, the quantity demanded will be exactly the same. That's why the value is 1. So the band will just stretch the same as what the price, 10% increase in price, 10% in quantity. And then we're going to go to inelastic. That's where inelastic, you can also normally say the price elasticity is smaller than 1. Or you can say 0, and then smaller, it's bigger than 0, smaller than 1. But if you just say inelastic is smaller than 1, it's also fine. So that's in the case, if you think of the elastic band, if it's inelastic, if there's a 5% increase in price, you know, it won't stretch as far, it will stretch a little bit. So, or say there's a 10% increase in price, it will only be a 5% increase in demand. So the demand side doesn't stretch as far. So that's why it makes it inelastic. So price change will cause a less reaction in demand. And perfectly inelastic, it's almost the same as perfectly elastic. It's only the coefficient value is important to know is 0. So there is an end to it. That's why they've put a 0 there, just to explain. So it doesn't go further than 0. So perfectly inelastic, as you would have seen from the assignment, has got a vertical demand curve. And the value is 0. So the price changes doesn't really matter. But it will only go, the quantity will stay on a certain amount. That's why it's 0. And that's perfectly inelastic. Inelastic, I think this was in the assignment. Inelastic, like we said, is a big price change. It's not as elastic. It will cause a smaller change in the quantity demanded. Unit elastic, obviously the same magnitude between price and quantity movement. If it's elastic, a small price change will cause a larger reaction in demand. Now, if you ask to explain it on the hand of graphs, just like in the assignment, you have to you have to put in the demand curve firstly. You have to label your curve. You have to put unit elastic. For some people, just drew the graphs and don't say what type of electricity. You know, the markers will deduct marks for that. So fill in all the detail when you get that. So it's important to show the percentage changes or the magnitude of the changes. It can be percentages or just show on your graph the one is smaller or bigger than the other. And always put in the coefficient. So those are the factors you must remember in an illustration of elasticity. The same for all of them. You put in the values, you put in the demand curve, and you show the coefficients. This is just a summary of them all. I think this one was exactly in the assignment. These were the percentages. You can see how it's better to show with the percentages, and you can show the marker, you understand the concept. Everybody still okay? Want to take a 5-minute break, or shall we carry on? Carry on. Maybe we'll finish earlier. Hey, must we try and get it? Want to drink some water? Yeah, you're right. Okay. So, so you may be asked as a question, maybe not to show the different types of elasticity in the format that we've just discussed. You may be asked to give a summary of price elasticity on a demand curve. So this slide is important. So you'll see unit elasticity. Once again, you your graph with price and quantity, and in the middle of that's your demand curve that you see over there. So on your demand curve, unit elastic will always be in the middle, where there's similar changes to price and quantity when the coefficient is 1. And if you go up the curve, it becomes more elastic. So on this part of the curve, there's unit elasticity. So as you go up the curve, on the elasticity side, then the band will stretch a lot. So this is all elastic. From there upwards is all elastic, all perfectly elastic. And down will be inelastic and perfectly inelastic. So if you ask to illustrate elasticity on the hand of a demand curve, like it's a summary of different points on a demand curve, then you will have to draw that curve with the values. It doesn't have to be 4. It can be 1 to infinity, or sorry, not 1, bigger than 1. So it will be anything from 4 up to 10, say, for instance. But you have to show that you understand. If you move up the curve, that the coefficient value increases, and here it will decrease towards 0 on the bottom part of the curve. So this part of the curve is inelastic, and that part of the curve is elastic. Is that clear to everybody? This is basically the same graph, just with a different gradient of a demand curve. Once again, your unit elasticity is in the middle with a coefficient of 1. And then as you go up the curve, the elasticity becomes more. It's bigger than 1 and up to infinity. And then also downwards will be towards 0 always. Just remember, elasticity, perfect elasticity is always to infinity, and inelastic is only up to 0 because it can only go so far. Okay, so that part of the curve is inelastic, and that part of the curve is elastic, with unit elasticity in the middle. This is just basically the same graph. So these 3 slides you can see in conjunction with each other. But the reason why we put values in like that is, okay, a few slides down, I'll come to it just now. But that's what it looks like with values in. And then, as it says there, this is for information only. You don't have to, you won't be expected to give those values in a table format. This is just to explain or to illustrate what the concept means. So this is slide 95. Won't be asked to complete a table like that. Now this is a summary of the the demand curves that we've just shown, that curve. If a coefficient value of elasticity is bigger than 1, then it's elastic. And so you go on, and if it's smaller than 1 or 0, then it becomes inelastic. So that's the inelastic share. It's smaller than 1. From 0 to smaller than 1. You're right. So that's the elastic part of the curve, and that's the inelastic part of the curve. So you must just go and see for yourself what will happen in the price, quantity, and the total output or revenue. So the reason why that was given, these were questions in previous exam papers where you had to take the demand curve like that one, and you had to relate it back to revenue. Now this is the revenue curve. That's the total revenue curve. That's the shape of the total revenue. It goes up to a saturation point, and then it starts coming down. And this is exact question was in previous papers. So just understand this part. I must say, this one won't be asked, but it's good for you to understand it. So this is just the relationship between price elasticity of demand and total revenue. It may be a short question, but I'm not going to give such a long question about it. But there's your demand curve, what we addressed now, and that's your total revenue curve, and then why it comes to various points. When you look at the previous papers, there is an explanation in there as well. Then it's important to know the factors that will influence elasticity. And you have to list them, or list a couple of them maybe. So it could be a question. Right? Factors influence the elasticity of demand. And these are the factors: luxury or necessity, availability of substitutes, portion of your monthly income spent on the product, habit forming, durability, and time period. So those are all the factors. You may be asked to name 4. So just study those, but you're sure which factors influences elasticity of demand. There are some more. It's actually in conjunction with the previous slide. The definition of the product, advertising. Some people I see did put in their assignment that advertising will change the elasticity value and the number of the uses of the product. So we understand the factors influencing elasticity of demand. Right, income elasticity. I think there was in the definition in the assignment, you had to define income elasticity. Now that's when your income increases, you're going to spend more, you're going to consume more, and vice versa. And it's always important to know for income elasticity, there may be questions about the type of products. That's why I talked earlier about inferior and normal goods. So inferior good is got a negative income elasticity. So if your income rises, your consumption will decrease. For a normal good, as we said earlier, it will rise. If your income rises, you'll buy more of everything. But for an inferior good, you'll substitute the inferior good with better goods. So if you used to buy hamburgers, your income rises, you're going to buy steak because you can afford it. That's why the demand for inferior goods will come down. That's the logic behind it. Now, they've all got various coefficients, necessities, luxury products. Make it easier for you. I don't ask a table or anything for these values. So just know the difference between an inferior product, a normal product, and what the effect of income elasticity, inferior product will have on income elasticity, or what your income changes will have on the inferior good. See it in relation. Always relate income elasticity back to inferior and normal good. That's what I'm trying to say. Just understand that concept. Then elasticity of demand, cross-elasticity. You may be just asked to define this. So you got elasticity of demand that we've elaborated on. Then income elasticity we didn't. You must know what it is and what the effect is on the inferior good and the normal good. And cross elasticity will only be either a definition or a short question that you must recognize what it means. And what's important for cross elasticity is you must establish whether the product is a complementary good or a substitute good. So for income elasticity, as I said, look at normal good and inferior good. That's why you have to know the definition, because you must relate it back to that. So for income elasticity, normal and inferior good, and for cross elasticity, remember you must relate it back to complementary or substitute good. Now you must just read what it is, complementary, and so complementary is goods used jointly with other goods. One complements each other. Nice tires on your car's mags or something like that. Complementary, and then substitutes is where the one is used in the place of the other good. So you may be asked, in terms of cross-price elasticity, which are the products that will be influenced by that? And then complementary and substitutes, goods and substitutes. It's related back to those. Cross-elasticity of demand, that relates more or less back to the previous slide. It measures the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a particular good to the changes in the price of a related good. It comes back to price elasticity. Whether it's a substitute or if it's a related good. See, there it talks about substitutes again, and there exactly what I said now, your tires and the motor car. That is a related good or complementary good. And then elasticity of supply, what does that measure? So you got different forms of elasticity. Maybe just remember that you get demand elasticity, elasticity of demand, income elasticity, cross elasticity, elasticity of supply. It's also important. If you read the definition there, it measures the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of a particular good to the changes in the price of a related good. So it's all about supply. So if the related good, the price changes, what's going to happen to the quantity demanded? Isn't this in the presentation? So you missed this one, eh? 103, okay. I'll send it to the group. I'll just mention that it wasn't in the presentation, but in any case, this will only be maybe related to true and false or multiple choice questions. 2 points and 2 points as well. Okay. So I'll send that to the group, and I'll send this to everybody and just say, it's not included in the presentation, but please take note of this information. I thought it was in. Strange. Okay. Then this is the one you have, right? Okay, so consumer choice indifference curves. There are always questions about indifference approach or the indifference theory in the exams as well, and it also carries a bit of weight. If you look at that information I gave in the start, which is at the bottom of the presentation, there are definitely questions about the indifference curve. Now, in terms of the indifference curve, you must explain what indifference curves are and list the important properties. So, if you focus on these three, you'll be able to do them all and then see how you draw the graphs and how indifferent curves look and how the budget line looks. We'll get to it in a minute. Okay, so you need to explain what indifference curves are. You need to define the budget line and explain consumer equilibrium. Always very important in terms of the exam. And that's what you have to know about indifference curves, the budget line, what they are, and examine the effects and changes. Then the basic consumptions you just need to know. You may be asked to mention it, or you must be able to recognize it in a short questions. Know what completeness is, consistency and non-saturation. So basically for non-saturation, the term means consumers get satisfied and prefer more to less. So you don't get satisfied, you need to use more. Then indifference curves, the same as, remember with the PPC was concave, so it bulges away from the origin, where indifference curves is convex. And it, we'll come back to that in a minute. But indifference curves show all the combinations of two products that will provide the consumer with equal levels of satisfaction. Right, the table, as it says there, is just for illustration purposes. That's how our indifference curve is constructed. So once again, just like with PPC curves, I won't give you values and expect you to construct it. You'll just be asked in general to explain on the end of a indifference curve concept. So I won't give you specific values that you must draw curves. There's just a table how it's drawn up. Now those values will appear on the next slide. So this is typically the shape of a indifference curve. So don't get mixed up with the PPC or the production possibility curve and the indifference curve. Indifference curve, the abbreviation is normally given as a U. So that's the indifference curve, and the PPC is normally, as the name says, PPC. So don't get confused. So the difference between PPC and the indifference curve is obviously that the PPC was concave like that, and indifference curve is convex. So it bulges in towards the origin. That's the difference. And then there are certain properties why the curve becomes flatter. You'll see in the next slide. It's normally convex towards the origin. It slopes from left to the right, and it becomes flatter as you go along. Now, they never intersect or touch each other in difference curves, so it can't. I saw in the assignment people did cross the curves. Or in previous assignments, but they never intersect each other or touch each other. And an indifference curve map is a number of various indifference curves. Do you want to go to that slide? Quickly, that's an indifference curve map. So there's indifference curve 1, 2, and 3. So the map shows a number of different curves showing different satisfaction levels. Now with indifference curves, it's important to know what the law of substitution means. That, if you ask what is the law of substitution in terms of indifference curves, you'll say that the indifference curve becomes flat as we move towards the right of the curve, because you can substitute less and less and less until it's flat. And the scarcer the good becomes, the greater the substitution will be. And then it's important to know the definition. In terms of definitions, as I said, questions. The marginal rate of substitution, and that is the definition that you have to give in the exam if you ask. It's normally called the MRS, or the marginal rate of substitution. Now the definition reads that the rate of a certain point at which the consumer is prepared to sacrifice a small quantity of good, of one good, for a little more of another good. And that will be the formula of the marginal rate of substitution. It's the percentage change in the quantity on the y-axis, percentage change on the x-axis. That's also the budget line actually. We'll get to that in a minute. So, but what's important here is just to be able to define the MRS, or the marginal rate of substitution. And the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution is when moving from left to the right along an indifference curve, the MRS decreases. It's not a definition, but it's a quantity of, just a description of the law of the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Is when you move from left to right along the difference curve, then the MRS decreases. If you move to the right, obviously it will increase. There's the indifference curve map. That's basically just a table again, drawing up various combinations. But with indifference curves, it's always important to look at the budget line and what it means and how it is reflected on a graph. So the definition of a budget line, it indicates affordable combinations of the two products with your available income. So typically if you have a certain budget, you can buy so much of the one product and so much of the other product. That's basically what it boils down to. And the slope of the budget line is normally the price of the product on the x-axis divided by the price of the product on the y-axis. So that's how you calculate the slope of the budget line. You'll get to that in a minute with numbers. How to calculate points of intersection on axis. Your income available divided. Okay, I'll get to that. Let's go to the next slide, then I'll explain it. So basically, in terms of a budget line, if you want to work out the price and you're given certain information, maybe you're given your total income is 24 Rand. You can either work out, you can given a quantity with a budget, and you can work out the price. In this instance, if you're given an income of 24 Rand with bread at 4 Rand, remember the budget line shows quantity of various products. So just remember to label your curves right. This is quantity of one product and a quantity of another product. So if you're given a total income, say with bread on the y-axis of 4 Rand and meat 6 Rand. So the quantity then of bread will be 6 and the quantity of meat will be 4. Because if you divide bread is 4 Rand, how many can you buy? How many breads can you buy with 24 Rand? Divide that 4 into 24 and you get 6. So your price is always different. Price will be 4 Rand and your quantity will be 6 Rand. So there's your 6 Rand of bread. That's the quantity. Remember the budget line is worked out, the slope of the budget line is worked out with prices. So if you're given an income and you're given a quantity of bread of 6 quantity, and you divide that 6 into the 24, then you'll get a price of the 6. Does everybody understand that concept? Okay. So with the total income, you work out the prices of each product or the quantity of each product. Now the slope of the budget line is normally, as we said in the previous slide, it's the price of the product on the x-axis divided by the price of the product on the y-axis. So that's why your price of meat will be 6 Rand. So it's a 6 divided by the 4. So it's always the price on the x-axis divided by the price on the y-axis. It's always like that. So you always work out the price. That's 6, and that'll be 4. The price 4 Rand and 6 Rand, and then you divide together, and that will give you the slope of the budget line. This may be a calculation in the exam, so take note of this. So at the price of 4 Rand, you'll be able to buy 6 loaves of bread, and at the price of 6 Rand, you'll be able to buy 4 portions of meat. But remember, you can substitute in between them. You can buy less of the one and more of the other. That's what the theory is all about. So how do you, this may be a question as well in the exam, take note of it. If you get an indifference curve map, where's equilibrium on an indifference curve map? Show it with a budget line. So then you'll do it typically like this. You'll draw the indifference curve map that you must be able to draw with 2 products, any product you can use to illustrate. Draw the indifference curve map, which is these 3 different ones. Now equilibrium will always be where your budget line touches the most tangent point. Your budget line, that's equilibrium in the market. So the same, on U1, if you draw another budget line, it will also have to touch there. at the most tangency point and also for difference curve 3. So you'll get 3 budget lines. And then you'll see now that if you join those, then you get the income consumption or the price consumption curves. We'll get that to that in a minute. So this is typically within difference curves. You must know how a budget line is. First know how to draw in difference curve, how it looks, with the various values of one quantity, of one product on the y-axis and one quantity on the x-axis. Draw the indifference curve map, or just one of them with a budget line, and show where equilibrium is. You must be able to show within difference theory where the equilibrium is. It's different to price and quantity. No, you can. This is just an illustration, so you can do it. It could have been meat there, but the most logic. The reason why bread is over there is the most logic is that bread is normally cheaper than meat. So it will be easy for you to understand. Put the less expensive one on the y-axis and the more expensive one on the x-axis. But it could be any two products. It's just as an illustration. But that doesn't really, you won't be penalized. You can actually use any product, any two products. But what is important to remember is that the quantity of say, commodity A and quantity of commodity B are on the two axes. And you relate all your answers back to those two commodities. So that's equilibrium. So at that point, over at point B, two conditions apply. The combination of goods purchased has to be affordable, and the weighted marginal utilities of the different goods must be equal. You can just read through this carefully. This wasn't asked, but read through it carefully. Then just for better understanding for yourself. Now why does that point B, that equilibrium point, why does it change? These are the reasons here. When there's a change in income, then the budget lines shift parallel. So if there's a change in income, the budget line will shift from that budget line to that high up on the indifference map. And if your income decreases, obviously it will come down. Just a point to remember. And then changes in price. So this is important to understand. If there's a change in income, then the budget line will shift parallel. So it will, there's your budget line, it will shift parallel. But if there's a change in the price, it will swivel from one point. It will remain, whichever one of the two products is kept constant, but your budget line will just swivel, either that way or that way. So, so if there's a change in price, one point will remain constant, but if there's a change in income, then both can be changed. You can buy or use more of both. And that's what I said, now if you get two budget lines with two indifference curves, and you get the price consumption curve. Now you may be asked to show graphically what the effect of a change in income will be on the indifference curve. Now the change of income, then the budget line, as we said, now will shift parallel. So then you have to draw this graph with two indifference curves with the budget lines touching where equilibrium is on either of those budget lines, or of the indifference curves. And it's important to remember that if you join those curves, it's called the income consumption curve. Could be asked. So just take note of this slide as well. And that's for a change in income, then they shift parallel. This is for the effect of an increase in price. So one will be kept constant. Say bread will be kept constant, and your budget line will just shift parallel. Now once again, those are the tangent points, and this is the price consumption curve, because we're talking about price. The previous one was the income consumption curve, we were talking about income. So you may be asked to distinguish between the two, the income consumption curve and the price consumption curve, and show graphically what it means. So for income, it will, if you have an indifference curve map, you'll get a parallel shift. And for price, one will be kept constant always, and you'll get the tangent points there. Because one is kept constant, you'll get different tangent points. If you combine those, then you get the price consumption curve. And I know in ECO10A we were asked in detail to explain the demand, how the demand curve is derived from that. So there you'll see that the price of meat, the quantity of meat, just corresponds with the 2 points over there. But if for your exam, you're going to be asked to distinguish between the price consumption curve and the income consumption curve. Just make sure you can do those two graphs and illustrate it. Then background to supply, the theory of production and cost. This is more or less where the calculations start coming in the tables and that. Now these are the most important parts of it. You'll see in the information that I gave at the end, it refers back to study unit 8, and this is what you need to know. You need to define and calculate the various revenue, cost and profit concepts. You need to differentiate between the short and the long run. That may be a question, for instance, in the short question. Distinguish between short and long run, what it means. And distinguish between fixed and variable inputs. Explain the various cost concepts and the relationship between them, and explain the law of diminishing returns. We did touch on it earlier, but here it appears again, and then draw the total, marginal and average product curves. This is important. You may be asked to illustrate the total, marginal and average product curves. You need to know the shape of the curves, where they cross and what they look like. You need to practice that a little bit. And then draw the average and marginal cost curves. There's a difference between the product curve and the cost curves. The shapes are different. We'll come to it in a minute. And then you must explain the relationship between production and cost in the short run. We'll just go through this and I'll tell you what is very important. You need to know what profit is. That's obvious. It's a surplus of revenue over cost. So it could be a short question. What define profit? So it's a surplus of revenue over cost. That's obvious. You're right with that. If you run your own business, how will you make profit? If you earn more than what you expend. And revenue is the total value of sales. Now the formula for revenue is total revenue is just price times quantity. Now the term marginal comes in play in cost, product, revenue, anything. So it's always remember, I think there was a question in the assignment to define marginal, the term marginal. It's always to produce that extra unit or to earn that extra unit at some stage. So the formula for marginal revenue or marginal cost or marginal product will be the same. It's just the symbols that will change. But for marginal revenue, for instance, it's the change in total revenue divided by the change in the quantity. When we get to the tables, I'll explain what that means. Some people I can see still battling with that concept. When we get to the table, I'll just elaborate a little bit more. And average revenue is quite easy, or average cost. It's just the total cost or revenue divided by the quantity. So I must say this will be asked in a table format. But it's important. That's why it's important that you just need to understand that. So here we get to a table, for instance. So if you've got your quantity and your price, now your total revenue is just those two times together. And there's the formula, you just apply it. The marginal revenue is the change in total revenue. Now there's total revenue. So it's from 0 to 400 is 400 divided by the quantity. So the change in quantity. The change in quantity was from 0 to 100. That's why that's 100. You all see that. Is that everybody okay with that? It's important that you just understand. So marginal revenue That's the formula. It's a change in total revenue. This is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. So that's why there was a 400 change here and there was a 100 change there. That's why it gives you the value of 4. So your marginal revenue is 4. And the same, you can go on like that. Here the change is from 400 to 800 and from 100 to 200. That's why you'll get again 400 divided by, there was a change of 100. That's why it's again 4. But it could be different values. This is just to explain how it's calculated. Everybody okay with that part? Because that always comes up in the tables. It's the marginal, average, total, and so on. And then the average revenue. People still battle with this, but all it is the total revenue, which you get there, total revenue divided by the quantity. So it's a 400 divided by the 100 gives you the 4. So average is always just the total divided by the quantity. Okay, there on this slide is what you need to know, short run and long run. It's quite important on this slide. And it's easy to understand a fixed input. It cannot be altered in the short run, and a variable input can be changed in the short run. And in the long run, for instance. So, in the short run, the firm can expand output by increasing quantity of variable inputs. Just understand that part. What's important on this slide is to know what the law of diminishing returns is. You need to define that. So, the law of diminishing returns, just to read it, that everybody can read with it, as more of a variable input is combined with one or more fixed inputs in a production process, the points will be reached where first the marginal product, then the average product, and finally the total product will decline. So this could be a definition for 3 or 4 points. This one. So just make sure that you can do that. And we first talked about revenue, and now it's cost. And we're also going to talk about profit. So cost of production depends on technological link between inputs and outputs, prices and productivity of various inputs. The theory of cost is based on the theory of production. The total cost, once again, is I think in the assignment people struggled with that table. So total cost, you were given fixed cost and you were given variable cost. Total cost is just to add those two together and it gives you a total cost. And marginal cost is the percentage change in the total cost. We'll get to the table in a minute and I'll just explain it again. Divided, it should actually be divided by the, it's variable cost. That's just an explanation. So the total cost, change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity. So it's always, with the term marginal, you'll always go to the total and to the units or the quantity. It's always between those two. So total average cost is the total cost divided by the quantity. Everybody is happy with that. That's quite obvious. That average is the total divided by the quantity. And as we said earlier, profit is the total revenue divided minus the total cost. Total revenue minus total cost. This could be also in the short questions, first two questions. Explicit costs. What's important here is you need to know what explicit cost is for exam purposes. Explicit cost is that in the brackets there. Monetary payments for the production factors of other inputs hired by the firm. Normal profit we've addressed, you can just read through that. Then economic cost of production. Need to know what economic cost is of the production process. Opportunity cost, which is the explicit plus implicit costs. And I'll explain it in a table that's coming up. And economic profit is then just the total revenue minus the total cost. Or it should be always, for a business to operate profitably, it should be bigger than the total cost. Now this little table you need to take note of. So economic profit, actually you must distinguish between economic costs and economic profit and economic accounting profit. That's the difference. The difference is that economic profit takes into account explicit and implicit costs. It's normally a bigger base that you need to take into account. The economic profit is only the explicit costs. Now, explicit costs were defined in the previous slide. Implicit cost is normally including normal profit as well. So that's maybe ask what's the difference between economic profit and accounting profit. Show it in a table format, or you may be given a table, that diagram, and then you need to establish that accounting profit is only explicit cost, while economic profit is implicit and explicit. Now, as I said, the term marginal, it could be for product or profit, it could be for costs, or it could be for anything, for revenue, for instance. So total product, you will be given that, or you'll be given, in cost terms, you'll be given the fixed costs and the variable costs. Those two together will give you the total. But for product, you'll be given total product on its own. So marginal product is the total product, difference in total product, divided by the difference in a quantity. It always comes back to the quantity, the units or the quantity. So once again, total product, there's a 16 change, and a change from 0 to 1, there's 16 there, and there was only a 1 change. So 16 divided by 1 will give you the 16. Happy with that. The same here, 16 to 44 will give you the 28, and because it's only a 1 change, it will be 28. This could have been maybe 5, then you have to divide that 44 by 5, it will get a different value. You understand, this is just for illustration. It won't always be that the units will be increments of 1. So the principle that you must understand is the change in total profit, and then you must look what the change is in the units. So it may give you different values. It's just to explain what it will be. So here the difference between 44 and 78 is 34. Because it was only a one increment, that's why it's 34. But if it was 2, it would have been 17, the value. You know, if the increments was in 2s. You understand that? So, and then the average product is the easy one. That's normally just the total divided by the quantity. So people tend to overlook that. It's very simple. So your average is the total divided by the quantity. So if you, for instance, had, say, the average product, and you had to work out or how can I say it now? Average variable product. Actually, average variable cost. And you must work out the average of that. You just take the number, like the 16, divided by the quantity is now in this case 1. That's why you get the 16. If that was 16 and that was, say for instance, 2, you would have divided that 16 by 2 and you would have had a value of 8. Sorry, I mean on the right hand column there. So it's just your average is always the total divided by the quantity. That's the formula that you must remember and practice. Then I said earlier, maybe it will be you'll be asked to show different shapes of marginal, total, average, and marginal product. This is in terms of labor. It could have been in terms of cost or revenue as well. But your total cost, in this time, total product of labor, is always that shape there. And then your marginal and your average product will be that shape there, the one crossing the other, with the marginal product above the average product for a while. That will be the shape. So next slide, that's the same as that one. I just want to get to these. I'll get back to the tables now. Just in terms of the graphs that I've just addressed there, you need to know what the shapes of the marginal product curves and the marginal cost curves will be. So the product will be sloping downwards and the costs will be sloping upwards. So that's the relationship between production or productivity and cost. So there's your marginal product, shape of the curve, and your marginal cost will be that shape there. You won't be asked to work out the values in the exam for that. You just need to know the shape of the curve. I'm just going to go back. Okay, we've addressed that. Once again, here's a table. Let's go through this table quickly. So there's your fixed cost, and there's your variable cost. Now, all that total cost it was in the assignment, is fixed cost plus the variable cost, and you'll get your total cost. And your average fixed cost will just be the fixed cost divided by the quantity. It will give you the value. And average variable cost, there's your variable cost divided by the quantity. It will give you the average variable cost. It's just misleading. It's just important to focus in on it and see what's off. And then your average total cost obviously will be just those two together divided by the quantity. And then your marginal cost is important. Margin is always calculated on the total cost, as I said earlier. So marginal cost is the change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity. That will always be the same. So you'll take 16 to 34 gives you the 18, and because it's increments of 1 again, it will remain 18. If that number was 2, not 1, it would have been your total cost is the 18, which is the difference, the difference between total cost. The difference between that is 18. Sorry, that is 18. Divided by 2, that number would have been 9. Do you understand that? Yeah, because there will be tables about this. So just make sure. If you struggle, if you practice it, if you can't come to numbers, use your study guide. There are nice examples in the study guide to work out these calculations. If you don't get to the value, ask me and I'll explain to you. So marginal cost will always be there. So make sure you can do that. Or not specifically cost, the term marginal. It could be in cost, it could be in revenue, or in product. So but the term, the principle stays the same. Are you okay with that? You must work through that study guide and do the examples and come to me if you... I think there was a question like this in the assignment. So just go to the answer sheet and see how the values were calculated, and then you can do this as well. That we've just addressed. Then, okay, market structure 1 is perfect competition. Some of the study objectives is you need to define and indicate what the characteristics of a perfect competitive market are. That's all in the slide. So those 3 things you need to know about market structure 1. So explain the demand curve under perfect competition and draw the demand curve for a single firm under perfect competition. You must determine where profit is maximized in the short term. Indicate whether a firm records an economic profit, normal profit, or economic loss. There was a question in the assignment, so you could be asked either one of those, the economic profit, I think in the assignment was economic loss. So on the hand of a graph, explain any of those. We'll get to those slides now, but it's quite easy once you just sit and draw them for yourself. and then determine the shutdown or the open up point for a business. So a perfectly competitive market, it occurs when none of the individual market participants can influence the price of the product. So it's fluctuating, it's typical free market system. And there are price givers, price takers and quantity adjusters. The buyers are price takers and the suppliers are quantity adjusters. Now this is important here because you may be asked, given a table, to distinguish between the various market systems. Now this one is a perfect competitive market. Then you're going to get a monopoly or a oligopoly. We'll get to that in a minute. So the only question that will be asked in the exam on these market systems will be a definition or a comparison between the systems. So make sure that you know the requirements of a competitive market. Large number of buyers and sellers, no collusion, it's a homogeneous product, freedom of exit, and so for a monopoly it will look different. So you can draw yourself some columns for perfect market, a monopoly, oligopoly, and a monopsony. I think we do a monopsony in this. So for the market systems, just compare. You may be asked, we'll get to the rest later, but the table will read maybe something like that. In terms of the number of buyers or the typical products that's sold, you may be given a few of those. Compare a perfectly competitive market with a monopoly and a monopsony in a table format. So you need to know, we'll get to that in a minute. Here's the table right here. Can everybody see there? So that's exactly what I said there. There's the criterion or the feature. So the number of firms for a perfect competition is many firms. For a monopolistic competition, that is it there. For oligopoly, it's only a few, and for monopoly, it's only one. It's in terms of the number of firms and the nature of the product. For the perfect competition, it will be homogeneous or standardized. For a monopolistic competition, it will be differentiated. Oligopoly, it will be either one of the two, and for monopoly, a unique product. So this type of table you may get, where you compare the different market systems in terms of the criteria set there. So study that table. That's on slide 1. Is it in yours 140 as well? I'm not sure. 139, eh? Okay, so on 139, but you know what I'm referring to is the table between the various market systems. This may be a short question. The demand curve for the product of the firm under perfect competition is where the price, where average revenue equals the marginal revenue. So just have a look at the slide. I don't think there's a question of this about this in the exam. Once again, you can see the tables is important for any, as I said, for cost, revenue, product, or whatever. And there's always marginal questions. Once again, the marginal revenue here is just the total revenue, change in the total revenue, divided by the change in the quantity. There's increments of 50. That's why the marginal revenue stays on 600. But it could have been other increments, and the numbers would have been different. You need to, I see some frowning there. You need to go to the table in your study guide. There are nice tables about this. Just make sure that you get the answers at the back. So all you have to do is you have to apply the formula and see if you get to the values. If you don't, if you're not sure, you must ask it. I mean, some people it's obvious, but others may struggle with it. Yeah. It's not a difficult paper, I can assure you. But if you take in what we've discussed now, I think you'll pass. It's, we won't mark negative, and it's fairly straightforward. What I said here now, if you take all that into account, all the questions will be asked like that, for different marks, in a slightly different format maybe. But if you cover what we've discussed, you'll be okay with the exam. And who's been going through previous exam papers? Who's been going through previous exam papers maybe? Not at that point yet. Okay, so what I was going to say earlier, this last 16 days, we'll leave for questions. So if you go through old papers and you don't know what it is, try and attempt a question and send it to me, and I'll quickly tell if you're on the right path or not. So the time that's left now, I think, is just revision. So we'll go through old questions, and I'll even post a few questions that you must look at. Like that last slide, I'll post to the group and say, make sure you can do that equations. Okay, so this last few days we'll use for revision like that. But I see you get confused with all these tables. Yeah, but the principles are exactly the same. Are you confused with them? Hey? Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah, yeah, it's a symbol. So what I want you to understand is that most important to understand is the term in anything, cost, revenue, or product. It's always the total, change in the total divided by the change in the quantity. So there's the formula. So as I say, go to this slide in your presentation and see if you can get to those values. Then once you do it, you'll understand it. All right, so there will be tables in the exam. As I said in that law, I refer to tables. Won't count a lot, but I see some people battle with the tables. I can suggest if you start with it and you don't cope, we can set up say a face-to-face meeting. Yeah, the people who understand it. We can just work through a couple of numbers. I'll bring my calculator, you bring your calculators, and we go through it, and we'll see what it means. But it's quite easy. Just apply the formulas. There's the formula that you need. Yeah, you got to know the formula to be able to do the calculation. So learn those formulas, and it's just into the equation, and then you do the calculation, and you'll get to the value. So what I suggest is practice as much as you can of the tables that we've seen in the presentation, and also in your study guide. And see if you can get to the numbers. I say the tables in total count at most maybe 10 or 14 points maybe in the exam. So it doesn't, but the principles are the same. Okay, as you can see there, this is not prescribed. Total approach, but you need to know when will a business shut down. It's all about the total revenue and the total cost. It's simple. So if your total cost exceeds your total revenue, you'll shut down, and vice versa. And then the marginal approach, okay, the profit maximizing rule is that the marginal revenue must at least be equal to the marginal cost. Then a business will carry on, but as soon as that changes, that your marginal revenue becomes smaller than your marginal cost, it will shut down. I think we spoke earlier about economic profit, and okay, no. So that's in terms of the graphs. You need to show those that I talked about earlier. Same as in the assignment, there was economic loss. But just to understand, the differences between those two, those three over there. And that's all in the slides. We did touch on it earlier. That's just the difference between a total revenue and total cost. Will give you the profit. So obviously your maximized profit is around about in the middle there. And then the profit will start going down and down. So This will be the maximum approach. But this is just for your information. So for profit maximization, this is your marginal cost curve, and that's your marginal revenue curve. So as soon as your marginal cost curve starts rising above your marginal revenue, then you'll reconsider to carry on with business. So it's just shut down or open up rules. Here's a table, it's exactly the same. There's again marginal. But you won't be expected to do this table. This is just in terms of cost and revenue. Just to show you where the optimum for a business, where the optimum profit will be. We're almost finished with the slides. Then we can ask some questions. All right, take note of this slide. It should be slide 147 in your presentation, I think. You need to explain this graph. You need to show where profit is increasing, where profit is decreasing, and where your profit maximizing level of output will be at 4. So take note of this graph. Study this graph. Read up in the textbook about this graph. And this may count a few marks in the exam, something like this. So that's an important graph. It's the marginal revenue and marginal cost of the firm operating in a perfectly competitive market. Now, once again, read your question. You may be asked to illustrate the marginal revenue and marginal cost of the firm operating in a perfectly competitive market. It's illustrated by the end of this graph. Or you may be given the graph and asked various questions about the graph. So just read up on this concept over here. Okay, that comes back to that economic profit. Economic profit exists when all of that is in place. So the price that you charge for your product is larger than the minimum cost. Or the total revenue is larger than the total cost. Or the marginal revenue is larger than the marginal cost. You may be asked to, in terms of economic profit, to give the three characteristics of economic profit. Now those are them over there. Be a short question, and then for normal profit and for economic loss. If you go through that, you'll understand what it means. Then these curves, I think we did in the assignment as well. So all three of those are important. I said it now. So in the assignment, we did economic loss. So you must be able to illustrate with marginal cost curve and the average cost curve where your economic loss is. This is slide 149 in your presentation, is it? Yeah. So just make sure you understand the concepts around those three over there. You'll see that the normal profit, there's no shaded area. But as soon as you get a loss, then the shaded area is above the AR and MR curve line, and then if it's profit, it's below the AR MR equals MR curve. Okay, this graph in economics 20A is more important. I didn't ask this graph, but this is just how you derive the marginal cost curve. There's your average cost curve, your average variable cost curve, and your marginal cost curve. Now, as soon as your price reaches a minimum there, it crosses the average variable curve. That's where you start thinking of closing down a business. At that point, you'll break even. But I didn't ask this. This is just for your own information. So all I'm saying is marginal cost curves, average cost curves and average variable cost curves are important, but they're more important in terms of these concepts. That's slide 149 in your presentation. And read up a little bit about it. Don't just look at it, just read up a little bit on it in your textbook and in the study guide. Otherwise you'll learn it like a parrot, but you won't know what it means. So just make sure you can address that slide properly. The first market structure was the perfect competition, if you can remember. Now the second market structure is the monopoly and perfect competition together. But this is going to be asked just in that table format where you must compare the different systems. Remember that table that I said earlier you need to know? She looks confused. Let's go back to it quickly. Yeah. There, is it on the next slide? Okay. So at slide number 139 is important of all these market structures. 139, all right, but I remember now, it's in the next slide as well. So there's market structure 2. So this is the type of a table that you must learn or study. This table is the same as the other one, just in a different format. But this is the type of a table that you need to know under the different systems: perfect competition, monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly. This could count a few marks in the exam. Maybe asked, like I said, in terms of number of firms or the nature of the product or the entry into the market or the information or the collusion. And for the different systems you need to distinguish between what the differences are. That's a continuation of that table. But it's all in that slide 139. This is all summarized in that slide 139. Now once again, just under a monopoly, you need to distinguish or to illustrate the profit part to make it easier for you. There may be a short question on this, but I didn't ask the graph. You don't need to show that. Concentrate on those other 3 graphs: economic profit, economic loss, and normal profit. And on the labor market, we touched earlier in the additional exam information, those last 3 slides, there's some stuff asked about the labor market. Just go back to those slides. It's at the bottom here. This question here, question 8, is on that. Completion of a table in terms of labor. So in terms of this study unit, you need to know the study objectives. That's all you need to know, is to identify major differences between the labor market and the goods market. One is labor, like you work at SBS, and the other one is goods sold at a shop or a market. And then explain the determinants of labor supply, and explain how labor demand is derived. This is interesting information for you people to know. Provide reasons for differences in wages. That's, everybody wants to know that. Explain what is meant by the informal sector. That you need to know. Informal sector. And discuss the role of trade unions. 1 sentence. It could be recognizing the recognition of those in a short question. There won't be long questions on the labor market. So only long question on the labor market is that question there. Only counts 3 marks. Now it boils down to that table on slide 139, that question. Think in terms of monopoly, perfect competition, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. So it boils down to that. It's not necessarily for the labour market, but the question is just structured like that. But it's that table you need to know. The various market systems, it could be the market systems for labour, for instance. The question is just asked like that. Okay, so I think there's some time left. Let's ask some questions. If anybody is not sure, it's also very easy to email me. I always respond to my emails, and I put a lot of information on the email. I think you've seen it. I've posted quite important emails that you just need to look at in terms of graphs, calculations, explanations, and so on. But the best is if you start preparing and you're not sure about anything, you just ask me and we'll sort it out. Okay, so just to get back to this information, I also gave this in the study week presentation. It's important to just look at the focus areas of each question. If you concentrate on that, you'll look at old papers as well. We don't ask exactly the same questions as in old papers, but the basis of it will maybe covered like that. The only new or strange concept is this last slide that I put up, which I'll send out to everybody. You must be able to do those calculations for a few marks. So that's equations, a demand equation and a supply equation, and how you work out the equilibrium price and quantity. And you get that by equaling the two equations and then calculating the various values. It could count it depends what you must calculate, but it could count anything from 3 to 6 marks. But once you've done it once you've completed it yourself, do this exercise. It will make sense to you. So just to summarize then, there'll be true-false questions, multiple choice questions. There will be questions about the flow diagrams. There will be questions about supply and demand. There will be questions about the PPC, production possibility. There will be questions about elasticity and indifference curve, and then a few about the labour market. Now this equation, for instance, falls in the supply and demand theories, supply and demand curve. The best is if you start preparing and you're not sure, rather ask me. It's free, and I always help. And we can even arrange a meeting, face-to-face meeting, and then I'll try and explain to you and go through the tables. It looks like a lot of people are battling with the tables, and it's not so difficult, really. The problem is, the reason why you have to do the tables is if you carry on with your degree and you do ECO10A, maybe ECO500, the basis for these tables you need to understand. All right. If that's all from everybody, thanks a lot.